So let's say we have a dummy user profile JS file here in the pages folder. So a user profile page, for which I'll add a component here, the user profile page component. And in here, we want to get some user-specific data and show that on the screen. So of course, we export it like this. But now that's a page which we can't pre-render, because we need to know for which user we are rendering this. Now we could expect a user ID as part of the URL, so we could make this kind of dynamic and expect the user ID instead. But then everyone who enters this ID in the browser is able to see some data for that given user ID. So that's not what I want here. Instead, we want to identify the user making the request, let's say with help of a cookie which we set before. Now at the moment we don't have that here. We didn't add any authentication, we're not placing any cookies on the user's machine, and therefore we don't really have the use case here. But it hopefully is a scenario that's easy to imagine. And later in the course we'll dive into authentication and we'll then have this actual scenario. So therefore here we want to return some user-specific data, let's say the username, but again we need to get access to the request object which carries the cookies and the headers to find out which user sent this request. That would be a typical use case for getServerSideProps. We can't pre-render this page because we don't know which users will have in advance, and we don't get access to their cookies in advance. Therefore, we want to export an async function here, an async function called getServerSideProps. Now we get a context object here, at which we'll take a closer look in a second, and we also need to return an object here, and the object which we return actually needs to have the same format as it does in getStaticProps. So that return object does not change. It should have a props key, it can have a not found key, and it can have a redirect key. The only difference is the revalidate key. That is not required here, and that can't be set here because getServerSideProps per definition runs for every incoming request. So there's no need to revalidate after a certain amount of seconds because it will always run again. So therefore we return an object with props, which makes sense, I guess, since it's called getServerSideProps. And these props will then be made available to this function, which will still be called by Next.js. But as mentioned before, it will not be called in advance when we build the project, but really for every incoming request. So here we could then have a username prop, which I for the moment hardcode to max. And then here we output props.username in the component function. And if we do all of that, and we then visit a /user profile page, so this page which we just added, we see max here at the moment. So that works, and that proves that getServerSideProps works because that's where the value max is coming from. But the important thing now really is that this only executes on the server after deployment, and also on our development server here, but it's not statically pre-generated. And that has a couple of important implications.